can tell me what the text for today is?
Ezra.
All right, I was afraid nobody was listening long ago, but somebody was. Good. Can you find Ezra in your Bible? Let me give you a little clue. If you open your, by the way, it's on page 731 of my Bible, but that's wrong with other books. If you take your Bible and split it right down the middle, you should land somewhere around Psalms 119, I think. And then from Psalms, you're narrowing it down, and then you've got some history, which is 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and then comes Ezra, and then Nehemiah. So right between 2nd Chronicles and Nehemiah, we've got Ezra. It's a short book. Ezra and Nehemiah are contemporary. That means they played in the same band. No, that means they lived at the same time. I don't know how many of you remember all the history of Israel. I don't. But we know some basic things about their history. And one is they had been disobedient and unfaithful to God, and He had allowed them to be overtaken by who? King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians. And what had he done? Well, he tore down the city. He tore down the temple. He carried people off, those that he hadn't already killed, to Babylon. And they were there for 70 years. Now, during that time, some interesting things happened. Number one, I think you can probably figure out, Nehemiah was not a good guy. He was a pagan. He was a heathen. He was one who delighted in causing pain to people that he didn't like. He had the power of life and death. He could kill somebody and on purpose, in broad daylight, anytime he wanted, and nobody would say, "You're under arrest." Nobody would say, "How dare you?" Nobody would say anything. But while he is there and the Israelites are there, God intervenes. The question is, does God intervene in countries, in governments, in heads of state? And the answer is, at least we know in Ezra that he does. Because he caused this guy Nebuchadnezzar a lot of trouble. Basically caused him to lose his mind. Ate grass. You know, I see counting the cattle out there, and I saw one that's all hairy, and he doesn't look like a cow. No, what is he? Well, that's our king. And he did that for 7 years, and then here's where God really had to intervene. He goes back on the throne. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but guys that are taken out of office, especially for being crazy, are generally not reinstalled, but Nebuchadnezzar was. Well, why? Because at the end of that 7 years, he had an epiphany. He had something that caused him to look at life differently. What was that? Well, he came to recognize that there is a God in heaven. And he attributed power and majesty to him. Because before he had attributed power and majesty to himself. But now he recognized God. And as a result of that, he's restored to power. Through this time, we see Israel's people interacting. We have people like Esther. We have people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. People like, of course, Ezra and Nehemiah. But we have examples of how God used those people in very significant ways. And Daniel, recall, is elevated to number 2 or so in the land. But during that time that he's there is a shift of regime. There is a different ruler that comes on the scene. Because you see, in one night, this changed from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire. And the reason was Darius led his men through the water channel, and they overthrew the city. Okay. When you have that kind of a change, not just of a party, but of a nation, a national identity change, how likely is it that the same leader, the same people are going to be put in positions of authority? Generally doesn't happen, but in this case, Daniel is retained. And so he's there all through the time that they are in captivity. We see God's hand in that nation. But here's the thing. At the end of 70 years, and by the way, God had prophesied you'd be there 70 years. At the end of that 70 years, the new king, which is Cyrus. Am I getting these right? Sometimes I miss the names. If I do, please give me a little grace, because I don't have all the names memorized. But Cyrus is king, and he not only recognizes the God of heaven, he authorizes Nehemiah to go back to the city and rebuild it. The wall. You know, cities back then had to have a wall if there was any protection at all. And their wall had been torn down. And not only did he tell him he could go, and by the way, it was his personal sacrifice for him, because Nehemiah was his food tester, wine tester, which means if anybody's going to poison the king, Nehemiah would be the first to know and the first to stop talking about it. So in that situation, we've got God using a man. Comes down to this 70 years. Nehemiah has gone down, built the city, actually had help from Cyrus, and then God allows this guy, Ezra, to go. I want you to turn to Ezra, first chapter. Let's read beginning verse 1 in chapter 1. In the first year of Darius, the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, he was a prophet, by the way, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. Now, here's the key thing. God puts it in his heart. So God is working. God has the ability to change hearts and minds. Even the pagans, but this guy has had an introduction into the God of the Israelites. And he knows that he is a powerful God. And so, first of all, this is a fulfillment of prophecy, which means what? Who's writing the script here? Who's in control of the activity? It is God. All along, it is God. For what purpose? His purposes. And so he says, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, and he makes a proclamation. Now, I don't know how much time to take reading from the text, but I would encourage you to go home and read this proclamation in chapter 1. Because it is really quite enlightening that a guy like Cyrus would make a proclamation that the Lord, the God of heaven, is responsible for him having his kingdom. Quite a difference from Belshazzar, who after Nebuchadnezzar had to have a hand right on the wall. You know, he thought he'd, we use the term, someone thinks that they're pretty hot stuff and they're born on third base and think they hit a triple. Well, that was kind of the situation for him. And so he's talking about all the things that he's got, all the things that he's done. He's on the rooftop. He's looking out over the city. He's patting himself on the back. It's a wonder he didn't disjoint something. And then a hand writes on the wall with no body attached. And what does it say? Well, basically, you're found in the balance. You're on the short end of the stick. You've been found guilty, and your kingdom is taken away from you tonight. And that's when this change of regime took place. So instead of him patting himself on the back, Cyrus begins his proclamation by acknowledging that it is God who is sovereign over the affairs of men. By the way, that's what I think the theme of the book of Daniel is. I don't know, not everybody probably will agree that that is the main theme, but I think it is, because throughout all of Daniel's experience, he sees the hand of God. Do we? Do we only see the hand of God when things are going our way, whatever way that is? Or do we acknowledge that God is sovereign over the affairs of men? Now that doesn't mean that we don't, have anything to do with it, but it means that in the final analysis, God's purposes will be accomplished. Now, he goes on from there, and again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to skip down to verse 5. Then the family heads of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose heart God had moved, prepared to go up and build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem. All their neighbors assisted them with articles of silver and gold. Basically, they took up a collection. And not only is Cyrus going to make his contribution, others are going to as well. Something else Cyrus did. When Nebuchadnezzar had raided Israel at the beginning of this ordeal, he took a lot of stuff out of the temple. Gold and silver, plates, goblets, bowls. Why? Because gold and silver is, valuable. And he had taken it all the way to Babylon. And here's what's amazing. This guy Cyrus gathers it up and takes an inventory because he wants to get it all. And he sends it back so it can go back in a temple that is yet to be built. Now, that is again an indication of what has happened in the heart and mind of this man. Now, chapter 2, I'm going to read every word of. No, I'm not. It is a list of the people that go back to Israel out of Babylon. Why does he name them? Why does he give their, who they're the son of? By the way, do you know which person in the Old Testament had no parents whatsoever? This is a joke, by the way. Don't go home and say it's Joshua. He's the son of Nun. Bada bing. N-U-N. That was his father's name, was Nun. He wasn't a nun, but he was his father. Anyway, why do we have all these names? Because people say, oh, well, this is just boring. Well, maybe so. If we knew the people, it wouldn't be, but what it documents, this is a document of historical fact. These are real people. And they are not only were just people, they are named. They are known. And they trace their heritage basically back to Moses and Aaron, and because a lot of the Levites, they're descendants of Aaron. Point is, all of these are named and counted. They also have slaves. It's a problem for us, isn't it? And maybe it should be, because I'm not convinced that that is God's proven plan for mankind. I'm pretty sure it's not. But it's also part of the culture of the world that God doesn't seem at this point to be interested in mandating change. Why? Well, Bob, I hate it when I can't remember names. Blowing in the Wind guy, Chris, who wrote all the songs, Bob, little guy with the fuzzy hair.
Bob Dylan?
Bob Dylan, yeah. He said, you got to serve someone. He actually copied that from the Bible. But in one of his songs, he said, you got to serve someone. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you got to serve someone. See, we're all slaves to someone. We don't think so, but we are. We're ultimately slaves of Satan, or we're voluntary slaves to God. So that concept is a little foreign to us, but anyway, those are the people that came out of Israel. Now, when they get there, now keep in mind Nehemiah has already gone before. The walls have been built, except the gates aren't hung yet. And they start digging a foundation, laying a foundation for this new temple. There's been two temples. One of them we refer to as Solomon's temple. This one is going to be referred to as Herod's temple, but guess what? Herod is not even born yet. Why would they call it Herod's temple? Because he's going to do a renovation of it on down the road. Now, here's what happens. When they finish the foundation, they have a time of celebration. Why? This is a major thing. They've been in exile for 70 years. They have been bemoaning the fact that not only their city is down, but their temple, where they worship the God of heaven, is no longer in existence. And they're concerned about that immensely. And so now they are taking physical steps to remedy that situation. Now there are two groups of people. I know you've heard this before. You can always divide everything into two groups. But there are two groups of people. Those that were born before the captivity and those that were born in captivity. Because you see, the ones born in captivity had never seen Solomon's temple. They had heard stories about it, I'm sure, but they'd never seen it. Whereas the older people, they knew the splendor, the fantastic structure of Solomon's temple, because it was an eye-popper. It had a lot of elaborate stuff, a lot of gold, silver. So when they began, they sang songs when they got the foundation laid, and some of the people, the younger ones, liked the music better. No, that wasn't the reason. They cheered and were happy because the temple was being rebuilt. But the older people bawled their eyes out. Why? You ever see a house going under construction? About the time you dig the foundation, you look at it and you say, this isn't going to be a very big house, is it? It's interesting how they grow during construction, but they looked at that foundation and they thought, this is nothing like the temple that we're accustomed to. Now, there's also, we've got, disappointment and depression involved, but we also have opposition. Their opposition came in the form of a couple guys in particular, and if you wonder where I'm at, I'm going fairly rapidly. I'm clear over here in chapter 4. We have some guys that show up that want to stop the construction. Why would anybody want to stop a construction project? Well, they felt threatened by it. They like the idea of having a Jerusalem that is not very strong, doesn't have an army. A Jerusalem they could march to any time they want and march right into town. And if they're armed, they could probably take anything they wanted, do anything they wanted. And now we're seeing this city, this nation, starting to come back together. And they're threatened by that. And so what do? Well, they appeal to the king. Now we have a different king now, Artaxerxes. And they make the same thing that we see in our culture today. We see facts being manipulated. This is not a political statement. This is a statement of fact. I don't care which side of the spectrum you're on. If both sides are telling a different story, obviously logic says they cannot both be true. They could both be false, but they cannot both be true. And so we know that facts are manipulated. Well, they manipulated some facts. And they sent this letter to Artaxerxes. You can read it. But basically say, you need to know what's going on down here in Jerusalem. Because there's some stuff going on that's just not good for you at all. They're not going to be paying taxes to you anymore. They're not going to be loyal subjects to you. They're trying to build up their own little world kingdom. And so they send this message to King Artaxerxes, and he didn't know any better but to believe him. And so he puts the brakes on. Now, point of all this is, and I'm not going to cover the whole history of the book in one shot, but the main objective here is God is working. He is involved. And what happens to those who are in opposition to him? What happens to those that alter the truth? Well, not good. We have, again, an example where the truth is revealed, and the king, and I'm not sure if Artaxerxes and Darius is the same guy or not. It could be. I know when they're talking about building the foundation, there's one mention of Joshua, but it's a different Joshua because he has a different father. So sometimes we got that, but we also have different languages involved. We have a kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. So I don't know if he's a different guy. I should research that probably. But anyway, here's what he says. Once he knows what's going on, and God is directing his thinking. See, how do you know the truth? How do you know what is true? In our day, in our world, we're told a lot of things. We're told things about the COVID. We're told things about the elections. We're told a lot of things. Madison Avenue has always been telling us that this product will make you smell better. This product will make your hair grow, or not, depending on your preference. We're told a lot of things. How many times are we lied to? Be honest, a lot. So how do you know the truth? Well, sometimes we forget that God is a God of truth, and we need to pray to him to help us, to open our hearts and minds to truth, to use our head because he gave it to us. But it's hard to know. Well, Darius knows. Verse 13, however, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild the house of God. He even removed from the temple, we talked about the gold things, then skip down here in the middle of verse, what is it, verse 15, 14. He gets everything together. He appoints a governor, tells them to take the articles back. The point is, God is at work do you think the Israelites always thought he was? Do you think it was ever a challenge to their faith when they sat down on the bank of the river Euphrates and cried, literally bawled? What? When they remembered Zion. There's been songs written about that. Sometimes we cry because we remember the good old days, and we fail to recognize that God is still sovereign over the affairs of men. He is. He always has been. He always will be. And his purposes will be completed. Now, it doesn't mean we don't do what we can do as citizens or whatever, but sometimes we forget God is still on his throne. And 2 seconds after I draw my final breath, nothing will matter. Do you know that? It won't matter. To me, it won't. Isn't that true? We're going to leave everything at some point, or some point everything will leave us. It's encouraging to know that in light of all the things that could happen, might happen, God is still on the throne, and he's made us a promise. What is that promise? He said, don't let your heart be troubled. I'm going to prepare a place. I wouldn't lie to you about a thing like this. Of course, he wouldn't lie to us about anything. And I'm doing it so that where I am, you can be too. We can be together. And you know the way. I always identify with Thomas because I would be the one shaking my head and saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Went over the top here. I don't know where you're going, and how can we know the way? I may have used this illustration, but the story is told about missionaries on the field, and they need to go from this village to the next, and they employ the services of a guide to help them. And so he says, follow me, and he takes out his machete and he starts hacking away in the jungle. And they're a little bit taken aback because they thought he knew the way. And so they challenged him and said, hey, I thought you knew how to get there. And he said, I am the way. I make the way. The jungle grows fast. You make your way. Well, Jesus is the way. The thing that matters is not if Cyrus or Darius or Artaxerxes or Nebuchadnezzar, all these guys are names of kings that are long dead in a part of the world that we're all familiar with. Turkey, Pakistan, Iraq. This is where this is happening. Israel. But God is preparing a place. Jesus promised it. He keeps his promise. So don't despair about anything. You believe in God, believe also in him. We're going to stand and sing hymn invitation. The invitation is always the same. Who do you pledge your allegiance to? Who do you give credit to? The blessings that you enjoy, is it because you're just that good? Or is it because God has blessed you? Stand and sing as she uses.
Okay, we're going to be singing I Surrender All, first verse.